28. Evie walked back out of the command room and took her station. This whole thing had turned into a mess. Cass hadn't done himself or her any favors by leaving the way he did, even if he thought it was the right thing to do. And now, because of an overzealous ensign, there was a good chance the Sill had killed him on sight. They had no qualms about killing Coalition citizens, as evidenced by their actions with the Atlas. She double-checked the status of the ship's engines. Pearson had increased the timetable to another hour. She tapped the comm.
Engineering? What is going on down there? We can't afford to wait.
Sorry, Commander, Pearson said, having taken over to speak for Sester from Tyler.
We found another leak before we began the initiation sequence. We're plugging it now.
Plug fast, Evie said. Every second they sat out here waiting was another second Cass lost out there. If he still even had any time left. It was an impossible task. At least they would be able to get back quickly. Cass's shuttle would have been twice as slow as Tempest, which meant he wouldn't have been over there more than an hour at this point. She hoped they weren't too late. If anything happened to him, Box would... Shit. She'd forgotten to ask the captain about Box. It would have to wait until this mission was over. He'd be fine in his quarters until they were all out of danger. Still, she'd better check in on him, just to make sure he wasn't going to cause a problem. She tapped her comm.
Box, are you there?
No response. That was odd. He always responded. She glanced over at Zal.
Hey, Zal. Check the comms. Are mine going through okay?
Fine, Commander, Zal said. But it seems something is blocking Box's comm from receiving you. She arched an eyebrow. What would be blocking it? Looks like an override code, he replied, examining the data. Someone has intentionally locked him out of the system. Who? She asked. He stared at the console a moment longer. I am not sure if this is right, but... Lieutenant Page? Evie swiveled in her chair to a station to find it manned by Lieutenant Uma, who normally took second shift. Where is he? She yelled. Checking now, Commander, Zal said. The lieutenant looked stunned.
I only know he asked me to take over for him, Uma said. He said he wouldn't be long.
He's in Science too, Zal said, along with Lieutenant Rond. What would they be doing down there together? Evie tapped her comm again.
Diazal to Page. What the hell are you doing?
Commander? He asked. I had an...
Give me eyes on Science too,
Evie said. An image popped up in the view screen of Box laid down on a table, parts of him disassembled as his eyes blinked rapidly.
Holy mother of Kor, Evie whispered.
Lieutenant?
Stop what you are doing right now, she yelled into the comm. Science 2, this is Commander Diazal. Halt all procedures at this moment.
Green stepped onto the bridge, taking a look at the screen ahead of him.
What's going on? He asked. Is that the robot?
The scientist on the screen disassembling Box stopped, staring up at the video feed.
Zax, get down to Science 2, Evie ordered, and the rest of you, stay where you are.
Are they disassembling him? Green asked.
Why?
I don't know, Evie said, fuming as she shot out of her chair, headed for the hypervator doors.
But they sure as hell aren't getting away with it. Someone explain to me exactly what is going on, and do it right now, or all four of you are going in the brig, and you're not coming back out, Evie said, fuming. Beside her, Box lay on the table, his eyes still blinking, while Zax, Nurse Mankel, and crewman Zoras from engineering worked to reassemble him. Standing in a line were Rond, Page, Dr. Amargosa, and Dr. Stevens. And the only one giving her any eye contact was Page. You can't do that, he said. Isaac and I are the best helm and tactical officers the ship has, and we're about to go back into hostile territory. Just try me, Joro. Don't think I won't, she replied.
He continued to stare her down, but she caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Fear that she was serious, maybe.
Commander, I never wanted it to go this far, Ron said. I only wanted him off the ship. Is that the reason for the Admiral's request for an evaluation? Evie asked. Because of something you did to him?
It's not a him, Paige yelled. It's a machine. Nothing but metal and wires. What is the big deal?
This machine, Evie said, saved our lives back in Jatan. He's not like any other machine I've ever met, and he will not be treated as such. Do I make myself clear? Commander, we thought we had authorization, Ambergosa said. Otherwise we never would have— Authorization to what? She snapped. Lieutenant Rond reported it. He was having a malfunction and asked if we could repair it. Lieutenant Page backed up the order. I didn't know. You were being deceived. She turned to Box. Do you have a malfunction?
A sound like a laugh emanated from Box.
My only malfunction was thinking I could be part of this crew.
This was never going to work, he said. And though he had laughed, there was a palpable sadness in his voice. It broke Evie's heart.
Don't worry, Box, Zack said. They didn't do anything permanent or hit anything vital. You'll be as good as new in just a few minutes. We were being as careful as we could, Amargosa said, despite the insistence of the lieutenant that we just rip everything out and start over.
Evie got right up in his face, and though he had a couple of inches on her, she wasn't about to let him intimidate her.
I get you have a problem with Cass, but going after Box? Trying to kill him? That's too far, Lieutenant.
They don't belong here, Page said. They work for the Sargans for 5 years. How can you trust them?
Because I've seen who they are, who they really are. And I don't let my prejudices guide my actions.
She continued to stare at him, unblinking.
You're relieved of duty, and until I speak to the captain about this, consider yourself confined to your quarters.
His lip curled into a sneer. You can't reprimand me. He doesn't have any rights. I didn't violate any rules.
Conspiring with a fellow officer to do harm to another being? I think that qualifies, she said, dead serious.
But he's a machine, Page pointed at Box.
Don't make me call your own security personnel on you, Evie hissed. Return to your quarters now.
He uttered a sound of disgust and stormed out of the room. She wasn't sorry to see him go. The only problem was, he was right. He was the best tactical officer the ship had, and they would need him when they returned to Sill space. She turned to the rest of them.
All of you will be receiving formal reprimands on your service records. I don't care if you were following orders or not, she said before Amargosa or Stevens could protest. This is a gross violation of Coalition standards. He isn't Coalition property, and therefore does not fall under any Coalition guidelines. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, Commander, they both said at the same time.
And you, she said, turning to Rond. Page, I get, but what is so horrible about Cass? You were a party to mutilating his friend.
Rond winced at her words. He wasn't as committed to this as Page had been. If she were a betting woman, Rond never would have done this on his own.
Something about it just didn't seem right, Commander, Rond said. He's a criminal. And I thought...
He turned to Box on the table, where Zoris and Zax were reattaching his arm.
If we hadn't had to go after him, Blackburn would still be here.
Evie furrowed her brow.
Lieutenant, as a Coalition officer, you know we all take risks for this job. Aisha took the same oath you did. She knew the risks, and she accepted them. Every morning when we put on the uniform, we know in the back of our minds it might be the last time.
Ron turned away from them, and Evie thought she saw his eyes shimmer. He'd done it all for nothing, based on prodding and pressure from Page.
Am I?
He began, his voice shaking. Evie took him by the shoulders, forcing him to face her.
I understand this is hard, and this is not entirely your fault. But you did have a role in it, and you have to take responsibility for that.
He nodded, doing his best to maintain his composure.
Take a few minutes for yourself, then report to the bridge, she said. We need you on the helm. We'll discuss your punishment later.
He nodded again, and she dropped her arms, allowing him to leave the room. Amargosa turned to Evie.
Commander, please. You have to understand, we didn't—
Save it, she said, putting her hand up.
I trust I've made myself clear on this matter.
They both murmured agreements.
Then wait outside until the doctor is finished. I don't want you near Box again. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am,
Amargosa said.
Dismissed.
As soon as they were gone, she turned back to Box.
How are you feeling?
Fine, he replied. But his voice was too even, too steady. She glanced up at Zax.
Another 10 minutes, then we'll be done, and he'll be as good as new.
Evie reached over and took Box's working hand.
I'm so sorry they did that to you, and I wasn't there to stop them.
It's okay, he replied, still emotionless.
I don't think it is, but we're going to make it okay. Once the doc is done, I want you to return to sickbay with them. We're going back into SIL space within the hour, and we need as many good medics as we can get.
I think I'll just return to my room, Box said. That way I won't be a distraction. You're not a distraction, Nurse Mankle said. You're a great medic. Box didn't reply. Instead, he turned away from all of them, staring at some unknown point in space. Evie's heart fell, but she didn't let go. She was going to make this right. One way or another, she would make it right for him. 29. It was hard to tell how long he'd been walking, or that he'd been walking at all. If not for the solid floor underneath him, Cass might have assumed he'd tumbled off somewhere, strolling along a corridor that no longer existed. Something was wrong. He should have run into a wall by now. Based on the size of the SIL ship when he approached, there was no way it could be this long inside. In fact, the ship looked quite compact, smaller than the Tempest itself. If he'd been on board his own ship, he would have covered about 3 decks by now. Periodically, he'd reached out with his hands, moving to the left and right to feel the walls, but coming up empty. He had nothing to go by, and that made all of this stranger. When he'd entered with the SIL, he had seen walls, hallways, but now, without their auras, there was nothing. What if instead of falling from the restraint, he'd asphyxiated himself instead? Perhaps this was the purgatory of the afterlife, an endless black path leading nowhere. That theory made more sense than an infinite corridor on a decidedly non-infinite ship. Where was the crew? Where was anything at all? So far, he'd been nothing but cautious. Perhaps he needed to take a few risks. Just as the thought crossed his mind, he smacked face first into something hard and strong, knocking the air out of him and sending him tumbling backward. He cartwheeled his arms back and fell on the floor, wincing at the pain in his face. He stood, rubbing the sore spots on his face, and extended his hands, feeling for the structure he'd run into. As his hands felt the metal, Cass felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This was his shuttle. Somehow he was back in the shuttle bay. Though he'd been walking for a good 30 minutes, and the trip from here to where they restrained him took less than 3. Had he really traveled in a large circle? He'd come upon the one thing in the ship he'd been looking for. His luck couldn't be that good. Feeling his way around the outer hull, Cass slowly made his way to the door, which was still open. He climbed inside and felt for the controls, activating them as soon as he could reach them. The lights in the shuttle illuminated, prompting him to close his eyes. He turned the luminosity down to its lowest setting as he peered through the small slits of his eyes. When he finally opened them again, he was glad to see everything in the shuttle as it had been. The SIL hadn't touched a thing. He went to the back and pulled out the emergency kit on board, complete with portable lights. He opened one and pocketed the second, affixing the first on the end of his forearm. There was also a blaster inside, but he left it. Despite the SIL's threats to kill him, nothing would be gained by trying to match their threats. With his luck, the blaster wouldn't work on them anyway. Cass turned on the light, shining it all over the shuttle. It had a good beam, and would at least allow him to navigate this ship. Maybe even build a mental map. Though he still couldn't figure out how he got back here. The next order of business was to find Zenfor, convince her of his claims. Cass returned to the control console and double-checked the databanks. Zenfor had been right. Any trace of the information he'd downloaded was gone. Could the Sill have destroyed it themselves? There was no way to be sure. But here he was without any sort of proof of his claims, except the information in his head. It would have to do. He turned as the light caught the edge of something in the shuttle with him. Cass jumped back at the imposing black figure standing before him. "Fuck!" he yelled, his heart rate skyrocketing. It was like a physical shadow, completely devoid of any detail, standing at the door to the shuttle. Slowly its head aura began to glow purple, illuminating all the runes all over its body. Though they didn't glow. But they definitely hadn't been there before. The Sill stepped closer, its hand out. The long fingers curled around Cass's shoulder. "They said you'd try to escape," the Sill said. This was a different one than the guards who'd brought him in. It sounded like a male. "I wasn't trying to escape," Cass said. "Your actions and movements have been logged since the moment Zenfor left you. We have seen everything." The Sill let go of his shoulder. Cass ran his light over him, but the beam seemed to wend as it passed over the Sill's form, as if his body absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. "All I want," Cass said, ignoring the strange phenomenon, "is to have an opportunity to speak, to prove what I have told you is true. Consul Zenfor provided you with the opportunity. You squandered it." "She barely gave me the opportunity to say a word," Cass said. "This isn't something I can explain in one sentence. It requires someone to listen to me. I want to give you the information, to forge an alliance." "Providing information and forming an alliance are two very different things," the Sill said. "Who are you?" Cass asked. "Pregun Kafor. I am ship's guard. I'm to escort you to your trial." "You were there with me while I walked along, weren't you?" Cass asked, cutting his eyes toward the Sill. He hadn't exactly felt a presence near him, but it explained why no one came to get him after he was free from the restraints. Kafor swayed, as though he was taking a deep breath. "We can't have you running around alone. It is my job to observe you. This may be the only opportunity we have to interact with the Coalition." Cass dropped the light so it only shone on the floor. "Wouldn't it be better for both of us if that interaction was positive? On both ends? There's no need for a trial. I came here to warn you, nothing else." Cass caught what he thought might be a chuckle, though it was impossible to tell, as Kafor had no mouth. "Attempted escape overrides all previous interactions," he said, "and there must be a trial." "I wasn't escaping," he protested again. "If I were, why would I be holding a flashlight? I could have just tried to blast my way out of here." Cass furrowed his brow. "Are you telling me if I'd stayed where your people put me, I wouldn't have to defend myself?" Kafor's aura glowed brighter. "No. The previous charges against you for the death of the Sill crew would be applied instead." Cass threw his hands up. "So, none of that matters now? Isn't escaping less serious than killing 10 people? Are you admitting you tried to "No," Cass snapped. "No, I'm trying to understand your justice system." Kafor spread his hands wide. "It is very simple. A crime is committed, and the person committing the crime pays for their error. The trial determines the punishment, independent of the crime. Now," he took one of Cass's arms with his outstretched hand, "accompany me." "Wait," Cass yelled. "Wait, look. If I was trying to escape, I would have either armed myself or tried to use my shuttle to leave. I'm still here, and there's a blaster in that case back there. How do you explain that?" Kafor's head turned and seemed to stare at the case containing the blaster. They had to have a way to see. That much was certain. I came in here for a flashlight and to find out what happened to my files. Cass shone the beam across Kafer's face, though it never quite reached him. If I was going to find my way back to your captain, I needed to be able to see. I need to explain. The SEAL's head turned back around to face him. As I said, I am here to take you to punishment. There your life will end as it began, small and inconsequential. But you will have the sweet release of death to enjoy. We are doing you a favor. What? Cass yelled. My fate is already decided? But I haven't even had the trial yet. The SEAL let out a noise Cass could only assume was exasperation. It is our way for all inferior species. We are helping you. Your existence otherwise will only continue to be fruitless and inconsequential. It wasn't so inconsequential when I saved your ship, Cass yelled, as Kafer pulled him out of the shuttle by the arm. The SEAL was strong. His hand felt like it could be made of steel itself. If Cass pulled too hard, he could pop his shoulder from its socket, so he allowed himself to be led along. He wasn't going to get anywhere with this guy. Maybe there was someone else at the trial he could speak to. Laska's words flashed through his mind. Understand the other side. Cass stared at his feet, shining the light down. He'd never seen metal like this before. Pragan K4, could you tell me how the shuttle ended up here? He asked, trying to keep the anger at his unfair treatment out of his voice. When I left, it was somewhere else. A much smaller room. This is a holding facility, K4 said. A place where we store large items such as your shuttle. Our ship brought it here for us, to clear the way. Your ship? Cass scanned the area with a beam of light from his arm. The room was huge, by an order of magnitude over the opening he'd arrived in. This was most obvious by the distance from the shuttle to the corridors. They had to be at least 50 meters away. His curious mind couldn't help it. How had this ship been constructed? And how could it seem to change on him? Ships were static, not dynamic. I've never seen anything like this. Brenglass isn't unique, but she is a wonder, K4 said, his voice reverential. Cass shone his light above him, finding the ceiling more than 20 meters above their heads, a purple sheen to its walls. There was something odd about the internal structure. The crossbeams running across the ceiling reminded him of fish bones, evenly spaced ribs, perpendicularly attached to a central spine piece. And they weren't all the same. Some had variation to them. It was the strangest construction he'd ever seen. Whatever it was made of, he'd love to see the schematics. But he couldn't focus on that at the moment. He had to try and figure out a way to prove his case. K4 wasn't going to let him go, not without something concrete. What had happened to those logs? They couldn't have just deleted themselves. Someone must have... Paige, that son of a bitch, Cass uttered. What? K4 asked, still leading him along. Nothing, Cass said. He didn't want to try and explain why some humans betrayed other humans, and the screwed-up logic behind those decisions. But he bet anything it had been Paige. He'd seen Cass flying away, and unable to do anything to pursue, had emptied Cass's databanks, without knowing the value of the information held within. He knew the man had it out for him. And it turned out Paige might get his wish after all. Not for the first time since he left Sarkhan space, he questioned the wisdom of joining the coalition. It seemed it had finally caught up to him, one way or 30. Lieutenant, you have put me in a very precarious position, Green said, facing Paige in his quarters. Evie stood behind him, along with crewman Tess and negotiator Laska. That wasn't my intention, Paige replied. His attention focused on the wall behind Green. Regardless of your intention, that is the situation. You have instigated a conspiracy with a bridge officer and 2 science officers to do harm to another living being. If Box had been a human, or any other species for that matter... Begging your pardon, sir, but he's not human. He's a machine. Page kept his eyes forward and his body stiff. He'd stayed here ever since Evie had told him to report to his quarters while she spoke with the captain. Now here they were, less than 10 minutes before the ship was up and running again, and their primary tactical officer was guilty of subterfuge and conspiracy. Laska stepped forward, her tiny frame almost comical in contrast to Page's height.
Lieutenant, what is the difference between Box and all of the other non-human species we encounter that we have alliances with? She asked.
Page furrowed his brow, his eyes searching. He's been manufactured, built by someone else.
One could say the same about you, or me. We were built by someone else, and exist because of them.
It's not the same, Page said, his gaze dropping.
So, because he was built in a way different from you or me, you felt that gave you the right to do as you wished, to ignore any personal autonomy Box had, and impose your will upon him without his consent.
Page shifted. Well, I had concerns he was a security risk.
Then why didn't you file that in your logs? There is no mention of removing Box from his quarters and taking him to Science 2. In fact, I believe it was only Commander Diazzo's apropos timing that saved the machine's life.
He doesn't have a life. He's not even a he, Page said. It's a collection of parts cobbled together designed to pull Cyclax from underground so no one else has to. We don't treat any other machine like this. Why should it be any different?
The difference is Box has shown himself capable of individual thought and action, contrary to any initial programming. How many other Class 117 autonomous mining robots do you see taking an interest in medical work?
They would if they were programmed to, Page replied, narrowing his eyes.
Exactly my point. If they were programmed to. Box was programmed to dig in the mines under Cathora. Nothing else. How does working in sickbay correspond to that programming?
Page was silent.
Then we are in agreement. We agree Box does not follow his programming as most other machines do. Now, let's move on to...
Negotiator, Green interrupted. I think you've made your point. We're short on time here. She turned back to him.
I am sorry, Captain. If there is nothing else?
No, thank you, Green replied. Laska made a swift bow to each person in the room, including Page, and left. So what? He gets the same rights as everyone else? Page asked. Is that how this is going to go? I'm not here to make coalition policy, Green said, stepping forward. But the very fact he is an unknown should have given you pause. I've never encountered another machine like Box, and therefore I'm not so quick to dismiss him. And I certainly don't want to do anything that might endanger his existence. Suppose the coalition does rule he has rights after the fact. Then you would have been responsible for a murder. That's not... It doesn't... Page stumbled over his words. I already told you. I wanted him pulled because I felt without his friend aboard, I was concerned with the ship's security. Green dropped his gaze. We both know that's not true. When you asked me to have him confined to quarters, I only agreed upon the assumption we didn't understand Mr. Robeaux's motives. Now we do, and Box should have been released on his own recognizance. The fact is, you felt Box was a threat, not to the ship, but to you, in some deep-rooted and perverse way, and you took specific steps to remove him. Page only shook his head, glaring at Evie. I have to tell you, I find this very concerning, Green said. Your behavior, ever since Mr. Robeaux and the robot came aboard, has been unbecoming to a coalition officer. And as soon as we return to Starbase 8, I will be requesting you to be transferred off my ship. Page's eyes went wide. Sir? Over a machine? You know I'm the best security chief and tactical officer you can find this side of Horus. Evie couldn't help but smirk.
I'm well aware of your qualifications, but you bring a lot of baggage with you, Lieutenant. And I'm not sure I can trust you to do your job without these issues clouding your judgment. Just look at what you've already reduced yourself to doing.
This is ridiculous, Paige said. I've been serving this ship admirably for over a year, and this upstart comes in and throws everything into chaos? It's not right, Captain, and you know it.
I'll make my own judgments on what is and isn't right, Green snapped. You're confined for the remainder of this mission. Lieutenant Uma will be taking your place on the bridge. Can I trust I don't need to post a guard outside your door?
Paige gritted his teeth. That won't be necessary, sir. He said it with such a seething hatred, Evie thought he might go for the captain. But even Paige wasn't that stupid. Not unless he wanted to throw his entire career away. At least this way, he could still be assigned to another ship in the fleet. Green motioned for everyone to leave, Evie exiting the room first. Swift justice, just like the Coalition was supposed to deliver. Paige had screwed up, and this was his punishment. The only problem now was Uma would have to step up, and though she was good, she wasn't the tactician Paige was. Green joined her in the corridor as they made their way back to the bridge.
I can hear your enthusiasm in the silence, Commander, he said. He deserved it. After what he did to Box, who I think is emotionally scarred, by the way, you should have stripped his rank. Don't think it didn't cross my mind. But we're still unclear about what to do with the robot. And until the Coalition makes some sort of ruling, I don't want to take an action that might be considered too drastic, though this will be going on his service record.
As it should, she replied, keeping in step with him.
With Uma moving up to the primary shift, we'll need someone to take over second shift. Anyone in mind? He asked. Ensign Yamashita. Her skills back at Jatan were impressive, to say the least.
Hers had been the first name to pop to mind, despite there were probably more than a few qualified candidates on board. Why had she jumped to the ensign?
Isn't she in exobiology? He asked,
raising an eyebrow at his first officer.
She is, but wait until you see what she can do with a weapons array. Very well, Green said. Once this is over, give her a few field runs. We'll try it out.
As they stepped into the hypervator to go to the bridge, he rubbed his forehead.
Do you think I just made a mistake back there, with what we're about to face?
She pursed her lips, staring at the blinking lights, indicating they were moving.
I think if you'd kept him on the bridge, in an emergency, you would have been questioning if you could have trusted his judgment, instead of focusing on the task at hand. It's a lose-lose situation, but I think you did the best you could, given the circumstances. You're probably right. I picked Paige to serve on Tempest because he was the best at his job, but I neglected to see the darker side of him, the parts he hid so well. He's had a rough life, she added, so I understand where it comes from. It doesn't have a place on this ship.
He nodded, his eyes somber.
Let's just hope he finds what he needs elsewhere.
Box sat in his room, running it all over in his mind again. The sound of the drills and the saws, how they cut into him, extracting parts as if he were nothing more than a defective engine. He didn't want to think about what would have happened if Evie hadn't come when she did. They had come precariously close to his memory units, which could have completely wiped everything from the past 5 years, including everything he'd learned about medicine. Damn Cass. If he hadn't gone off without Box, none of this would have ever happened. No one would have ever suspected him, interrogated him, hurt him. But Ron baited him while Cass was still on board, so maybe there was no way to avoid it. Perhaps it had been the natural outcome of living on a ship full of organics. Box was homesick. He missed the reasonable excuse, and he missed flying around with just Cass. The man was an asshole, but at least he showed Box a modicum of respect. There was no telling with these people. It was like the more organics he was around, the worse things got. Why couldn't it be like it was back in the Sargan Commonwealth, where no one paid him any attention? Sure, maybe sometimes he had something thrown at him that he had to clean off later, but at least no one tried to kill him. At least no one that he wasn't actively pursuing or trying to kill back. The people here were too intrusive, too concerned with matters that didn't involve them. All they had to do was leave him alone, and he would take care of the rest. But no, apparently some people found just the concept of him repulsive. And he'd definitely seen the hairy, pus-filled underbelly of the great and wonderful coalition. After all this time, he understood what Cass had been talking about all these years. It didn't matter anymore. They didn't want him interacting with them, and he couldn't stand to be around them. That was fine. He would stay in the room until Cass came back. And if he didn't, maybe Box would steal his own shuttle and head off somewhere. Somewhere no one cared if he was an artificial life form or not. That had always been the plan anyway. He walked over and fished his entertainment center off the top of one of the unpacked crates, starting it up. He projected the image on the wall beside him and focused on one thing and one thing only. If Lady Penelope would find out about her husband's affair with the Duchess. Nothing else mattered. 31. Cass was ushered into a large room. Large enough so the beam of the flashlight didn't reach any of the walls. Behind him, Kafer nudged him on. As best as he could tell, it was circular in nature, with a 4-meter-high wall on all sides, though beyond that there seemed to be alcoves or something similar that stair-stepped backward until he couldn't see them anymore. Directly across from him was a pillar about 5 meters high, upon which crouched another sill, glaring down at him, its purple head aura swirling around. This aura was different. It seemed to leave the confines of the sill's head, branching out in different directions like bolts of lightning. It was beautiful, but when Cass glanced down, his stomach dropped. In the floor was a dirty grate, caked with what looked like darkened bits of hair, blood, and maybe even flesh. Was this an execution arena? After everything else he'd seen, he wouldn't think the sill to be capable of such gore. The entire ship seemed so pristine. What sort of other creatures have been in this exact same position, only to suffer a fate they didn't deserve? Did it even matter? Or was this all for show and nothing more? Kafer put his hand on Cass's shoulder again. Take joy, the life you lived brought you here, so it could be ended with swift dignity, he said. The sill above him on the pillar leaned over, peering down at Cass with a faceless head, which was unnerving. He wished they at least had eyes. It would give him something to focus on. He shifted from side to side, trying not to let his nerves get the better of him. He'd been in plenty of questionable situations before, places he thought he'd never get out of, and yet somehow he had. But this was unlike any other place, and he barely held any of the cards, so negotiating would be difficult. I would like silence, the sill atop the pillar announced. The voice was different enough from K4, but at the same time it hung in the air. Human, you have been found guilty for the crimes of attempted escape before, during, or after an interrogation by the Council. How do you plead? I don't plead, Cass replied. I don't agree with any of this. He shone the light up at the sill, but it did nothing but dissipate before it reached him. It was like this race was molded out of darkness, but he wasn't about to go quietly or easily. If they wanted to kill him, they'd have to get down here in the pit and get their hands dirty. Your plead is deemed irrelevant. The sill's head lifted. Shipguard, do your duty. Cass turned to face K4, shining his light on him, though the glow from his head aura had intensified. Maybe Rutledge was right. Maybe when we were out there waiting in that quaternary star system, I should have let him take your ship, because it's becoming obvious to me you're more worried about your borders than the sanctity of life. Kafer paused. If you really cared about justice, then you would be more interested in learning the truth, rather than just your version of it. He turned and flashed the light back up at the other sill. All of you. But I can see now that nothing I ever say will make a difference to you. You decide the fates of those less powerful than you before you even understand them. How can you profess to be an advanced race?
We don't need to understand them, the sill above him said, which is what makes us advanced. We don't concern ourselves with the trivial matters of those beneath us.
That's bullshit. If you didn't, you would have blown my shuttle to pieces the minute you saw me. But you brought me aboard because you were curious about what I might have to say. It just so happened what I did say didn't match up with what you were expecting. And now, because it is an inconvenient truth rather than a comfortable lie, you will execute me and wash your hands of the entire situation. Kafer's head moved up to look at the other sill, then back to Cass. He stepped back, his posture relaxing.
You say you were the human who sent the distress call 3.1 regulations ago?
I don't know what a regulation is, but if you mean 7 of my years, yes, Cass replied.
You have to prove it in some way. We cannot allow this disruption to continue.
Kafer held out one of his hands, palm up. Cass glanced down at his feet. They had smeared some of the errant fur and blood along the floor. Do you know how my people measure time?
We downloaded your information. You base your cycles on the orbit of your planet around its sun. You then break those orbits into 6 seasons, which are further broken into 73 days. Each day consists of 20 hours, which can be divided into minutes and seconds.
Cass lost his attention span for a moment. Yeah, that's it exactly.
You also categorize a grouping of 7 days into something called a week, though it seems superfluous, Kafer added.
According to our calendar, I sent the distress signal to your people on Decaton 65th, 2593. Or in other terms, 2593.2.65. We were in the Quaval star system, just inside your border. A quaternary star system consisting of a red supergiant, a white dwarf, and 2 mid-level yellow stars. The massive gravity from the supergiant obscured our presence, so we managed to find and surprise your ship. I sent the distress signal on frequency 111382 at 134900 hours of that day. Kafer glanced up at the other sill.
It is not enough. You could have obtained that information after the fact.
Cass shook his head. I couldn't. The mission was classified by my people. Only those aboard on the ship would have had it, and I was the tactical officer that day. I had control over the weapons.
Still, that does not prove you were there, Kafer said.
The proof is I am here now. Why else would my people send anyone else? No one has had contact with your race in over 100 years. No one would be equipped to speak to you. Wouldn't they send the only person they thought you might be receptive to? Kafer didn't respond, but he continued to hesitate. Listen to me, Cass said. You have to be willing to trust me. I know you see me as inferior, but allow me to show you the evidence. If I'm lying, then you can execute me. No one else other than me could tell you this.
It isn't me you need to convince, Kafer replied. It's Zenfor. She has the ultimate say over your fate.
Cass cut his eyes at the form looking down on him from the pedestal. She never gave me the chance. She had already made up her mind before she even came to talk to me. Kafer stared up at the other sill.
Prejudice? Agreed, the sill replied. Tainted questioning.
Kafer returned his attention to Cass.
Zenfor had a relative on the ship your people took. We did not realize it would cloud her judgment. She should have given you the opportunity to explain. What are the risks?
The sill above them asked. He shifted to the side of the pedestal, leaning over the edge. Risks? What risks? Cass asked.
The risk of not allowing you to make your case to her.
Cass craned his neck to the other sill. There is a threat that could potentially harm or destroy the sill and all the surrounding systems. I came to warn you and ask for your help. The other figure wasn't moving, but Cass caught the rise and fall of his chest. So they breathed after all. But how? He hadn't seen any way for them to take in oxygen. There was more to these sill than what was on the surface.
Allow him to make his case. It is a minor inconvenience,
the sill above him said. Kafer took him by the arm, leading him out of the center of the room back toward the door.
You don't know how lucky you are. A true rare gem in a field of common stones.
The sill judge said nothing as they left, the door appearing behind them as if it had always been there. How often do you bring people aboard for execution?
Whenever one of the inferior races living in our space leaves their planets. Some evade us, others aren't as skilled.
You mean there are other species living here?
Of course. My people come from a binary pair of planets orbiting what you know as Taurus Epsilon. But our home planet is called Thislia. Obviously, there are others within our space.
He led Cass down the dark hallway. Though they hadn't gone through a different door, there was something strange about this hallway. It wasn't the same one they'd taken to the judge. We have a binary set of planets in my system, too, Cass said.
We know. Amun and Mut, both Class J gas giants according to your own classification system.
You know a lot about us, Cass replied, his arm aching from where Kafor gripped it tight.
We learned a lot more after you arrived. Your shuttle's database was very informative.
Cass shook his head, unable to believe all of that useless data was still in there, while the thing he needed had been erased. In order to get the evidence I need to show your consul, about the attacks, I'll have to go back to my ship. There's another copy of it there.
Evidence gathering will be later, Kafer said. If you survive convincing the consul you are who you say you are, then we'll discuss retrieving the information.
It was the best he could hope for in a tense situation. Maybe the sill weren't as vicious as he thought. One thing was for certain. If Cass ever got back, he was going to kill. 32. Page sat on the edge of his bed, fuming. How dare Green take him off duty? The only thing he'd tried to do was keep the ship safe. It would have been different if it had been a normal machine following its programming. But there was something strange about this one. It wasn't alive, but someone had done something to it to make it seem alive. Any machine who had threatened a coalition officer would have been decommissioned, wiped, and reprogrammed. At least that's how they did it back on Meridian. Quite a few of the Sargans had machines helping them. They were easy cannon fodder and didn't complain when they got shot. Except the Sargans hadn't counted on the locals catching a few and turning them against their masters. Old Hauk, he had been a technical genius at reprogramming. He told Page once he'd been the chief engineer on the Coalition flagship in his youth. But the thing with old Hauk was you could never tell when he was lying and when he wasn't. Half the shit he said had to have been made up. Hauk would even install remote cameras in the robots, so he could make sure they would get back to where they belonged. Not to mention, it allowed everyone to see the real prize. The face on a Sargan scum when his own robot came marching back to his camp and self-destructed. Those had been the days. Not like now, when robots had rights and feelings. He'd never heard anything more ridiculous. That machine was an infiltrator for the Sargans, and he was going to prove it if he had to rip its central cortex out himself and bleed the information from it. Box had already threatened Rond with physical violence, and with a passive-aggressive gesture. That would have been enough to get any coalition officer put on suspension. By now, he should be disassembled and in 200 parts in the science lab. But no. It seemed that because this robot was good at emulating human emotions, he was being given the benefit of the doubt. Was he alive? Was he just a copy of life? No one knew. Except Paige knew. That thing was nothing more than an automated utensil programmed with a few quirks to make it seem more lifelike. It was the perfect vehicle for stealing classified information. And it roamed the ship freely. Any moment, he expected to hear a boom, feel the ship shake from an internal pressure loss, and a general alert come over the comms telling the crew the Sargans were closing in on them. Or the SIL, or any of 100 other organizations. The fact was, the traitor and his machine were a liability, and it was Paige's job to identify that threat and remove it. But how was he supposed to remove anything with both the captain and the XO protecting it? He slammed his fist down again, standing and pacing the room. There had to be something he could do. They hadn't left yet. He would have felt the ship jump into the undercurrent, which meant he still had time. He couldn't be out of his room more than a few minutes before the automatic scanners all over the ship found and identified him. Unless there was only one recourse left to him. He tapped his comm. "Isaac, you there?"
"What do you want?" Isaac whispered. "We're getting ready to depart. I can't talk now. I apologize you got in trouble because of me. But without you, this ship is in grave danger. We don't have any more time to spare." "What am I supposed to do?" he asked.
Paige racked his brain. If left unchecked to his own devices, the machine could have the run of the ship as soon as everyone was preoccupied with returning to SIL space. There was only one thing he could think of. "I need a favor. You're my last hope."
"Lieutenant Rond, are we interrupting you?" Green asked as he sat in the captain's chair.
The voice startled Isaac so bad he jerked his head back to the captain.
"No, sir."
He'd listened to Paige's request, thinking he was insane. Wasn't Isaac in enough trouble as it was? And hadn't Paige lied to him about the whole thing with Blackburn? Maybe not lied to him, but deceived him? If that was the case, why would he ever consider helping him again?
"Prepare to depart,"
Green said, looking straight ahead. Isaac tapped the controls, setting the course Ensign River had plotted. But his mind was on Paige's call. Already his heart was hammering about the thought of returning to SIL space. The traitor, Cass, had gone in by himself, and now they were going after him. And all this after they'd nearly lost the ship the first time. What could be so important the Coalition was willing to risk an entire ship and her crew? Paige didn't know. He was convinced Cass was working against them. But Isaac wasn't so sure anymore. Anyone with a head on their shoulders knew it was suicide to go into SIL space, much less go in alone. And if Cass had been working with them, wouldn't they have destroyed the ship already? Or were they out there waiting, with Cass by their side, telling them all sorts of Coalition secrets? None of this made sense. Maybe Paige was right. Maybe he was a threat. Isaac wasn't stupid. He knew Paige had used him. So where was the proof?
"Engineering reports ready, Captain," Blum said from behind him.
Green gripped the arms of his chair, leaning forward.
"All hands, this is the captain. Alert level 4. Everyone to designated battle stations. Space Wing fighters, prepare to depart."
He glanced around the bridge, Isaac watching him. Both the captain and Commander Diazel seemed calm, as if this was just another day, while he was a nervous wreck. The commander had essentially given him a pass. Maybe that was because they needed him for this mission. Or maybe it was because she really didn't believe he was at fault. But he was.
"Deploy the emitter, and let's make this happen," Green said.
Rond focused on the screen in front of him and moved the ship into position, scanning the space where they'd left the undercurrent the first time. His comm pinged again, causing his heart rate to shoot up.
Ready? Ensign River asked, startling him. You okay?
Isaac wiped the sweat from his brow, shooting her a quick glance.
Fine. Ready.
His fingers moved over the controls, as if on autopilot, sending them into the intercurrent. The ship lurched, and space began speeding past them at an accelerated rate.
12 minutes to SIL space, River said.
He couldn't do this, and it couldn't wait. There was no telling what Page might do now he wasn't answering his comms anymore. Isaac turned around in his chair. Green's eyes flashed at him.
Yes, Lieutenant? Sir? Lieutenant Page is attempting to contact me. He's asking me to wipe the internal logs of his movements.
Commander Diazol's eyes went wide, and she jumped up, running over to Zol's station.
Have you?
Green asked, his voice severe.
No, sir. But I should have told you when I got the first request, before we made the jump.
Green turned to Evie. Where is he?
I'm not sure, she said. He turned back to Isaac. I thought you said you didn't help him.
I didn't. I never accessed the internal sensors. You can check. Zol spoke. He's correct. No one on the bridge has altered the internal sensors. However, sensor control on Deck 5 has been altered, but I cannot tell by whom.
Why didn't it show up? Green demanded. Because we were too focused on leaving, Evie replied. And it's a good bet he's been to one of the weapon lockers.
But those are coded only to open to active security personnel, Isaac said. Evie turned to him.
I doubt you're the only friend Page has on this ship. She ran for the hypervator doors. Commander, Green said, turning in his seat. He's going to kill Box if we don't do something. I don't know who we can trust in security, she yelled back. Damn it, Green said as the doors closed. We should have just thrown him in the brig. He glanced at Isaac. Anything else you need to tell me, Lieutenant?
He bit his lip.
I think the commander is right. I don't think Page will stop for anything now.
33. I believe I have underestimated you, K4 said as they traversed the corridors. At some point, he'd let go of Cass's arm and allowed him to walk on his own. Though Cass was still so focused on seeing where he was going, he hadn't paid much attention. The interior structure of this ship was something to behold. It was as if every time he entered the corridors, they had changed on him. Despite the fact they had walked more than far enough to return back to where he'd been held. And they'd only seen one other sill in the journey, standing outside an egg-shaped door. Cass hadn't bothered to ask. Why? Because I didn't die in her dungeon back there? He asked. Exactly. As I said, not many escape judgment. I haven't seen it in a few hundred regulations. What is a regulation? Cass asked. Equivalent to 2.3 of your years, K4 said. How long do Sill live? K4 kept his gaze straight ahead. It doesn't matter. What does matter is we reach the console so we may resolve this discrepancy. Cass turned to him. What is going on with this ship? Why does it seem bigger on the inside? And why is it every time I leave a room, I'm in a different place than where I started? If Sill sighed, Cass would have sworn that it had been the noise K4 made. It's hard to explain to non-Sill. Your perception of space and time is different. Think of this ship as a gateway into an interconnected series of pods. You are not actually on the ship. You are in these pods. And the corridors connecting the pods are dynamic. As the ship moves in regular space, it translates to a corresponding location change for the pods. The corridors have to change and adapt. It is an interconnected network of units. You mean to tell me we aren't actually in space right now? He asked. No, we are in the space beneath. You have creatures on your world who stick their snouts out of the water while the rest of them remain below. Think of the ship like that. The part you encountered, the ship, is a way we access your dimension. Everything you see around you is what lies below. Console Zenfor is above, so we have to return to the top where we can access it again.
Sometimes the journey is long. Other times it is short.
Cass was flabbergasted. No wonder the Sill didn't want anything to do with other species. They had access to different dimensions. He now understood why they paid the Coalition little attention, especially if most of their society was here in what K4 called the space beneath. "Is this where you're from?" he asked.
"It is where we developed," K4 said. "We found this dimension over 10 of your millennia ago."
"Were you around back then?"
"No," he replied.
"Is this why everything is so dark? And why you don't have windows?"
"There's nothing to see in the void," K4 replied, sending a shudder up through Cass's spine.
The more he learned about this place, the less he wanted to do with it. He'd feel much better as soon as they were back in regular space.
"This place troubles you."
Cass shone the light against the walls with their purple hue, trying to imagine what was beyond them. How had these corridors been constructed if there was nothing beyond? What had been here before?
"It isn't what I expected," Cass replied.
"But why do the corridors change?"
"The physics of the space beneath are too complex to go into at the moment. But remember my analogy. It is more appropriate than you may realize."
"Do you mean the ship is alive?" Cass asked. K4's purple aura pulsed.
"We're close. Prepare yourself to make your case."
Cass shone the light ahead of them, but couldn't make out anything different. How could K4 tell where they were? It looked just like everywhere else they had been. They passed through what felt like a fog, and Cass found himself in a place he didn't recognize, but which felt familiar. The darkness was gone, and he was on the bridge of a ship, or at least the Sill equivalent of a bridge of a ship. A great big clear bubble showed a complete view of the surrounding stars, and he felt himself relax for the first time since arriving. The bridge itself seemed to be on a wide catwalk suspended in the middle of the bubble, without any supports, except where it was connected to the back wall, though there was no door behind him. All of the purple interiors he'd become accustomed to were gone, replaced with more traditional ship bulkheads and stations. 4 Sill stood on the bridge, one at the very front, close to the bubble, but still a few meters away from its surface. 2 more to the left and right, respectively. And in the center stood Consul Zenfor, staring out into space.
"Precon K4, she said. "What is this about?" "The judge has deemed you were hasty in your evaluation, Consul. He asks you to make another before he renders judgment."
"What?" Zenfor yelled, spinning around. Cass took a step back, despite the fact she still had no facial features. But it was as if he could feel her gaze boring into him once more.
"My evaluation was resplendent. Your evaluation was tainted. You did not allow him to explain," K4 said. "He does not need to explain. I understand the situation, and I understand he is nothing more than an infiltrator. He needs to be dealt with, especially after that escape attempt."
Cass stepped forward. "Consul, if I—" White spots exploded in his vision as he was thrown backward. He felt himself skid along the floor until his back hit the wall. For a moment there was no pain, until the rush of it bloomed all over his face. He blinked a few times, allowing his vision to readjust. Zenfor stood over him, with K4 to the side.
"Consul, the judge will not approve your request if you continue to taint your argument," K4 said, boredom in his voice.
Cass pushed up on his elbows, shaking his head and hoping she hadn't done any permanent damage.
"I will not listen to Coalition lies, and neither should you. You're too smart for that."
Zenfor turned her back on him, looking back out into space.
"I don't have time for this. Their ship is on the way back, and we are preparing a surprise for them."
"Proof I'm telling the truth is on that ship," Cass said, though it hurt his jaw to speak. His entire body ached. Had she even hit him? If Tempest was on her way back, then he didn't have much time. If he couldn't convince Zenfor of their intentions before they arrived, he had no doubt she'd destroy the ship. If his assumptions about their justice system were correct, she had proper cause this time, sending an infiltrator into Syl space. We could download their database, K4 suggested, raising one of his long arms with his palm up. Confirmation would... I've heard enough, Zenfor said. Get him back down to isolation. If the judge won't deal with him, I will, after this is done. I know now why losing a ship is such a high crime, Cass said. They're sacred, aren't they? They're living beings, and my people killed one. Zenfor turned on him. Our ships have the same rights as any Syl. When your people removed the crew and ejected them into space, the ship died, its body beneath disintegrating. What your people took back with you was nothing but a shell. We live in concert with our ships. One does not exist without the other. Your people killed one, and for that, there must be a penance. Would it help if I told you everyone else that was on the ship that attacked yours, along with dozens of others, died because they tried to reverse engineer your weapons? Weapons they gleaned from that ship? Cass asked. Zenfor stood still. It is not enough. How much revenge do you need, Consul? K4 asked. Allow the human to make his case. Then we can move on with this. Make what case? It does not matter if he was there that day or not. This threat he's come to warn us about, it isn't as if he even believes it himself. Do you, human? She asked. Cass stood, his legs almost giving out underneath him. His thoughts betrayed him. Zenfor was right. He had wanted nothing to do with this threat. He wanted nothing to do with the Coalition or protecting it. But people who lived in the Coalition, who still thought life under Coalition rule was a good thing, who still relied on it for their livelihoods, and who needed it to protect them. If he turned his back on the Coalition, he turned his back on them as well. And despite the attractiveness of such a prospect, he couldn't do it. Deep down, he was still a Coalition officer, and he had still sworn an oath. It didn't matter if the organization he'd pledged himself to wasn't the same one he thought it was the day he began at the academy. He had made that promise to himself, and it wasn't something he could just relinquish, no matter how hard he tried. Deep down, he was a Coalition officer, and it was his job to protect its citizens from all threats, even those that seemed unbeatable. You're wrong, Zenfor. Look at the evidence. If I'd wanted to run, I had plenty of opportunity. I came here in a shuttle with undercurrent capability. I could have gone off on my own, and no one would have ever known, because you would have destroyed the Tempest anyway, wouldn't you? But I didn't. I came here. I put my life on the line to deliver vital information. Now it is up to you to accept that information. Zenfor turned to her subordinate. He escaped his imprisonment. There must be retribution. In fairness, Consul, he could not breathe. Cass turned his attention to K4. You released my restraints? Why? Because you are correct, K4 said. You came here unarmed, and at the risk of your own life, only to deliver information. He addressed Zenfor. He knew he could not beat us, that he had no chance of stealing any secrets and giving them back to his people. When I found him, he had picked up his flashlight and left his weapon behind. I should have you sent to judgment for your insubordination, Zenfor said, her words seething with hate. But you won't. You know I am right. Consul, one of the other Syls said, its aura glowing bright. The Coalition ship is coming through the undercurrent now. Cass watched her featureless face. Her aura pulsed with an inconsistent rhythm. What is your decision? He asked. 34. The ship lurched into the undercurrent, just as Lady Penelope revealed she'd been having an affair with both the butler and the coach driver. Box barely felt the rumble of the grav plating as the internal dampeners adjusted, but his internal systems logged the jump nonetheless. He couldn't help but be distracted by the fact they were returning to Syl space. Was Cass okay? Or had the Syl already killed him and disposed of his body? He had to be content with the fact he might never know. Without Cass to broker some kind of peace, Box didn't believe any of them had much time anyway. He might as well spend his final few moments enjoying himself. He paused the program and put the device down. If he was honest with himself, what would make him really happy would to be back in sickbay, helping Zax prepare the triage unit, or practicing surgery on some cloned material. But he wasn't sure he could go back. Box glanced up, not sure why, seconds before the door to his room opened to reveal Paige, a wild look in his eye, and a standard Coalition pistol in his hand. Box jumped to the side just as the pistol fired, diving behind the crates he and Cass still hadn't unpacked. "You worthless piece of metal! You're not going to threaten the ship anymore. I'm going to expose you, then they'll all see I'm right." "You don't want what's in my head," Box replied from behind the crate. "It's nothing but porn and drama." Another shot hit the side of the crate, puncturing a hole straight through it, which exited the other side close to Box's side. The crates were useless as cover. He jumped up, making a run for the other end of the room. 2 more shots just missed him. "For the ship's tactical officer, you sure are a bad shot. You'd think you'd be able to hit a 2-meter-tall machine." He ducked around the corner to the restroom. "Shut up!" Paige yelled, firing off 3 more shots. One came precariously close to the room's window. Box glanced over. If the pistol's power was turned up high enough, it could destroy that window. Then the entire ship's hull could be compromised, now that they were in the undercurrent. He'd heard stories about what happened to material pulled into the current, and he wasn't keen to experience that as his last moment. "You're ruining my show," Box yelled. "I thought we'd settle this when you tried to have me disassembled." "Some people on this ship think you're more valuable than we are," Paige said, his voice closer. Box estimated he was approaching at 1 meter per minute, moving cautiously. He might be able to sustain a hit from the weapon, depending on its setting. Then again, it could blow a hole straight through him. And knowing Paige, he no doubt had it turned up as high as it would go. "I am," Box replied. "I can store 100 times the information and lift 20 times as much. Couple that with my ability to think and feel for myself, and you've got yourself 1 obsolete human and 1 superior robot." "If you're so superior, then why are you the one hiding?" Paige asked. Well, if he couldn't go out watching Lady Penelope, at least he could go out with some dignity. He broke cover and stood in the middle of the arch separating the rooms. "If you're so superior, why do you need a weapon?" he asked. Paige bared his teeth and tightened his hand on the pistol. For the first time in Box's life, he felt himself involuntarily flinch. It was a strange sensation. But he was grateful. At the last moments of his life, he was able to experience something completely new. "Paige, drop the weapon now." Box turned his optical circuits to see Commander Diazol standing behind Paige with her own weapon trained on his back. Paige didn't relax his grip or stop looking at Box. He only seemed to get angrier. "Don't make me ask twice," the commander said, a steadiness in her voice Box rarely heard. It was the same as it had been back down in those caves on Jatan. The commander was good under pressure, while Paige was visibly shaken. Sweat poured down his face, and the hand holding the pistol trembled. "He's up to something, Evelyn. I know it. You know it, too. You're just not willing to admit it. If you stop me, whatever he does will be on your conscience," Paige said. "I'd rather his actions be on my conscience than yours. You're the one who was trying to influence junior officers to assist you in your conspiracy. I don't care about your problems with the Sargans. This machine is not your enemy." Box kept his attention focused on Paige. He still hadn't moved, and he had Box right in his crosshairs. Page had to know, no matter what he decided to do, his career in the Coalition was over. There was no recourse after this. Not because of his actions toward Box, but because he disobeyed a direct order to stay in his quarters. There was a very good chance he could see himself as a man with no other options. "Commander? He's going to shoot me," Box said. "We don't know that yet," she replied. Her arm was still steady. "I'm pretty sure he is," Box replied. "He's got no other choice. His career is over. He'll be thrown—" "Box, shut up!" she yelled. Page's eyes flickered. He shifted them to the side, then back to Box. His breathing had also increased, as his chest heaved up and down with the fury of a man out of options. "Prove me wrong," Box said to Page, "or prove me right. It's your choice." Page creased his brow, as if studying Box. "What are you?" he asked, seemingly with genuine interest. His attention was so focused on Box, he didn't realize Commander Diazol had come up right behind him. With one fluid motion, she plucked the gun from his hand and drove the heel of her foot into the back of his knee, causing him to cry out as he crumpled to the ground. "Grab him," she said, and Box leaned down, pulling Page's hands behind him. The commander studied Page's weapon. "Highest setting," she said. "He would have blown a hole straight through you." "I was afraid of that," Box said. "Then why did you goad him?" Box shrugged, causing Page to wince as his own arms were lifted up. "I wanted to be as unpredictable as possible. Why didn't you bring your sword?" "It's not exactly Coalition issue," she smirked. The comm system came on over the room. "All hands, prepare for assault. Full alert." "Shit," Evie said, pocketing both weapons. "Get him down to the brig, and make sure you set up the encryption yourself." She stared at Page, who avoided her gaze. "Until we know who helped him, I don't know who on the security team we can trust. Get him stowed, then get yourself to sickbay." "Sickbay?" Box asked, as she made her way to the door. "If this goes badly, we're going to have a lot more wounded, and we need all the medical professionals we can get. Now get moving." She left them there alone together. Wow. He could actually go back to sickbay. This was like a dream. "I suppose now you have me in your clutches, you're going to finally kill me," Page said, his voice distant. "Just tell me one thing before you do. What is your plan here?" Box didn't even look at the man. Instead, he led him to the doors, a certain burst of pride filling him. "I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to be a doctor." Evie stumbled down the hall as the ship lurched, in response to what she didn't know. She didn't think they'd been hit, but she couldn't be sure. She tapped her comm back to the bridge. "Report," she said, making her way back to the hypervator. "There is a SIL ship in sight, Commander. The captain believes it is the same one we encountered before. We are performing maneuvering abilities to keep them from locking onto us with their weapons," Zal said. "I'm on my way back. Zal, make a note. Page is guilty of treason and is being held in the brig." "Aye, Commander," he said, then cut the comm. She made her way to the nearest hypervator, desperate to get back to the bridge. If they could see the SIL ship, it meant they had come out of the undercurrent already. Which also meant the SIL hadn't attacked yet. That had to be a good sign. Maybe Cass made it after all. The hypervator doors opened on the bridge, and Evie made her way back to her station, unlocking it, and checking all the incoming reports from all the ship's sections. Everyone was ready. "Report," Green said, keeping his attention on the screen in front of him. In the distance, barely visible against the field of stars, was a ship very similar to the one that had attacked them in the undercurrent. "Lieutenant Page is guilty of treason. He's in the brig now." She caught Ron glance back at her. "And Box is fine. I got there just in time." "Fantastic," Green said, his voice deadpan. "Perhaps now we can focus on our primary problem?" "Yes, sir," she said. Ron continued to perform complex maneuvers, while the SIL ship sat at the distance, unmoving.
They've been doing this ever since we came out of the undercurrent. At first they were closer, but they've backed off, as if they're luring us deeper into their territory. You think it's a trap? She asked. He shook his head. There's no telling what it is. What about the shuttle? Any sign?
Nothing on scanners, Saul said.
Should I try the greeting again, Captain?
Lieutenant Uma asked. She stood in Page's place at Tactical, and Evie had to admit she felt a lot better with her there.
Hold for now, Lieutenant. They haven't answered a damn thing, he told Evie. Do you want me to get Negotiator Laska up here? She might...
He shook his head.
Not until they respond. I'm not confident about this. If they pull back again, I'm going to order we break off pursuit and retreat back to the system. But what do we do once we're there? She asked. Are we supposed to keep trying until they stop humoring us and finally blow us out of the sky? Captain, the helm is being sluggish, Rond reported. I can't get her to respond. It's like she's stuck in a swamp.
Evie narrowed her eyes, checking her inputs again.
Saul?
I detect nothing, he said. We should be moving at a normal velocity.
Ensign River? Anything on your end? No, ma'am, she replied.
Evie glanced over the captain's shoulder to the engineering station.
Anything? Propulsion is working fine. We've got no idea, Bloom replied.
We're losing velocity, Rond said, his voice a pitch higher and tinged with a dash of panic. We'll be at a full stop in a few minutes if this continues.
Reverse. Back us out of here, whatever this is, Green ordered.
Rond nodded and input the proper commands, though the ship only continued to slow.
Whatever we're in, I think it's got us,
he said, as the ship drew closer to a halt. Green addressed River.
Did the sail ship cross this boundary when they began baiting us? He asked. I don't believe so, sir, she replied. They must have been on the other side of it. Invisible net, Green muttered. Now what?
Evie stared out at the dark ship slowly approaching them.
I have no idea.
Then she felt a low rumble through the room. 35.
Consul, they are trapped. The gravity net has them immobilized.
Zenfor continued to stare at Cass, while behind her in the expanse of space, the Tempest continued to slow down until it stopped completely. She hadn't said another word since the ship had come out of the undercurrent, only waiting and watching Cass. What was she waiting for? Even her own crew seemed confused. K4 stood off to the side, his attention focused on his console.
Consul?
One of the Sill on the bridge asked.
Shall we proceed?
Don't let your pride blind you, Consul, Cass said. That was my captain's mistake. He thought he was the only one who could save my people by eliminating a non-existent threat. When he approved the mission to go after your ship, we didn't know about the aliens. He was only doing it to strengthen coalition armaments. And now, because of his hubris, he'll rot in jail forever.
Why didn't you kill him?
Zenfor said. Death was too easy. He deserves a long life thinking about how he could have done things differently, how if he hadn't been so foolish, he wouldn't have ruined his life, and how his actions wouldn't have led to the death of over 70 people, your people included. No, death is a gift for Rutledge. He's going to suffer.
Will your people ever release him? She asked.
No. He has a life sentence for every soul that died. He would have to live over 7 millennia before he was eligible.
Consul, your orders?
The Sill asked again. Zenfor cocked her head back behind her.
Hold. If there is one thing I can respect, it is a fair justice system, Zenfor said. Present your evidence.
Cass straightened. Using my calendar, on Decaton 65th, 2593, the USCS Atlas, registry FCE 1201, attacked your scout ship in the Quaval system. The attack occurred at 13:45 hours, and I sent the distress signal at 13:49. The signal read as follows. To any Sill vessel in range, One of your ships is under attack by a coalition ship. Respond immediately. Less than 4 minutes later, you showed up. And when I say you, I don't mean a general SIL ship. I mean you, personally. You were there that day, Zenfor, as was I. I had hoped you being there would be enough to convince my captain to leave. But he decided to test his luck, as he didn't want to let go of the ship. He opened fire on you, which I now understand was the volley that gave you permission to fire back, which you did, killing 24 members of my crew. My captain had no choice in order to retreat. That was the last time I was in your space.
And what of the second encounter, where you succeeded? She asked.
By then, I was on the run, and no longer part of the coalition. But I spoke to my old captain. The new captain of the Atlas drew your scout ship into the ATRAC system, where she had mined one of the planets. As soon as your ship was in range, she detonated the explosives, destabilizing the precious balance in the system, and allowing her to get a drop on your ship as they fought against the change in gravitational currents. She ejected them into space and towed the ship back into non-aligned space. It was a terrible tragedy that never should have happened.
And the one in charge of the mission is being punished?
Cass nodded. If he told her about the other admirals authorizing the mission, he had the distinct feeling she'd kill him where he stood. But if he could limit it to Rutledge, he might have a chance. And technically, it wasn't a lie.
Consul, the gravity net is beginning to crush the other ship. Do we allow it to continue?
One of the other SIL asked. Cass glanced past Zenfor at the Tempest, locked out there in some invisible trap. He'd never heard of a gravity net before, but it didn't sound good.
Release the ship from the net,
Zenfor said. As Cass took a breath, she stepped closer. It was as if he were being swallowed up by something terrible. Even Kavor had never been this close to him.
Understand, I am reserving a final decision until after I see this information you wish to present.
I can accept that, Cass said, craning his neck to look at her face. Will you be able to see a recording? I don't understand how you're...
I see just fine. Better than you do.
She grabbed him by the arm, pulling him to the center of the raised portion of the bridge where she'd been standing when they arrived.
Speak to your ship.
Cass scanned the area. He couldn't tell where to look. Right here? Do I?
Straight ahead,
Zenfor said, impatience in her voice. Tempest? Do you read me? He called out. A screen appeared, as if it were plastered on the inside of the bubble, showing Tempest's bridge.
Robeaux?
Green asked, his harried face staring at Cass from his seat on the bridge. Evie sat beside him, though they both looked rough. Debris littered the rest of the bridge behind them. Had they been in another fight while he'd been gone? Is everyone all right? What happened over there? Cass asked.
As soon as we stopped, our inertial dampeners went offline, Green replied. The ship nearly shook itself to pieces. What is your status? Have you been successful?
I need you to transmit the telescope logs back over. Someone deleted my copies as I was leaving. Green glanced over to Evie.
Transmitting now, she said,
tapping some controls on her chair.
Are you okay? We have the information, Consul, the SIL at the front of the bridge said.
Display it, she replied. In place of Tempest's bridge, another image played. At first, it showed nothing more than the long-range image of a starfield. The image clicked over to a zoomed-in image of a sector of space which seemed relatively empty. But when the image shifted to the left, the entire field was taken up by a fleet of similarly shaped ships. All dark gray in color, they resembled a school of fish, with larger ones protected by the smaller versions. It was the exact same footage Cass had seen in the Admiral's office. The fleet of ships drifted as one, with none of them breaking off. The telescope flipped again to a wider view of the cloud of ships passing through a binary system. In the far corner, 2 smaller ships, red in color, approached the cloud. Before they reached what Cass would consider weapons range, the 2 smaller ships exploded. The entire cloud of ships made a turn, heading for one of the planets in the distant system. The telescope flipped again as the cloud of ships approached the planet's atmosphere. A moment later, a blue beam erupted from the cloud, but Cass couldn't tell where, and the planet began to collapse in on itself. Within a few minutes, the planet was nothing but bits of rock floating in space. It looked like a disorganized asteroid field. The cloud then moved again, turning its attention on one of the 2 stars in the system. The blue beam erupted again, this time at the star, causing it to collapse in on itself as well. But due to the massive gravity well left behind, the entire system began to fall apart, the second star disappearing beyond the first star's event horizon. The cloud turned and resumed course. The telescope flipped again to a wide-angle image, extrapolating a course for the cloud based on current projections. It led to the center of Coalition space, Earth's star, Horus. The feed closed, and the image of Green and Evie appeared once more. Zenfor turned to her fellows on the bridge. "Can any of that information be confirmed?" she asked. "I've sent a message to the Sanctuary, asking them to review and confirm the data," the Sill on the left said. "The star," K4 said. Though he didn't have any features, Cass detected some awe in his voice. Despite their power, apparently the Sill hadn't yet mastered the ability to destroy stars. "If this is true, I don't know how to proceed," Zenfor said in a rare moment of vulnerability. "We'll have no choice but to retreat to the space beneath," K4 said, "assuming the aliens cannot penetrate the dimensional barrier." "Our entire species? That's ludicrous. It is meant as an amendment, not a permanent home. If we were to leave this dimension for good—" "What?" Cass asked. "What would that mean?" K4 turned to him. "This dimension anchors the space beneath. It keeps us tethered. If our species were to let go and cut all connection with it, we could end up never finding another. Many dimensions are much more chaotic than this one. You should consider yourself lucky your species is native to it." "That's enough, K4. He doesn't need our society's history," the Council said. "The Sanctuary has confirmed the footage as genuine evidence, Consul," the Sill on the left said. Cass noticed his aura pulsed rapidly. "It hasn't been tampered with, and is considered trustworthy." "What system is that?" Zenfor asked. "We don't have a name for it," Green said over the screen. "It's so far away, no Coalition ship has ever been there. We don't know anything about the species they just destroyed either, though it is out past Omicron Terminus. Ships have been on exploratory missions in that direction, but they never returned." "How far are they from your borders?" "At their current speed, 219 of our days," Evie said. "Assuming they move through the Coalition at their current speed, how long until they reach our own borders?" Zenfor asked. 16,000 skirms, Consul." "What's a skirm?" Cass whispered. "Equivalent to 3/4 of one of your hours," K4 replied. "We don't measure days." "Right. No night cycle." He should have figured. "Which gives you a little over a year to prepare yourselves," Cass said. "We don't know they'll be hostile when they arrive, but we must be prepared for the eventuality. And we can't do it without you. It's like I told you before. I doubt they'll stop with us." Zenfor placed her long hands on the console in front of her, leaning over it while her aura pulsed with an intense, regular beat. If she were human, Cass would bet she'd be sweating. "Based on the evidence you presented, I'll have to confer with the Sanctuary on our next steps." She turned to K4. "Send him back to his ship." K4 led Cass back to the edge of the bridge. "Never did I think I'd see the day," the Sill said. 36.
Damage control teams to the bridge,
Evie yelled. Whatever the sill had trapped them in had nearly pulled the ship apart by its bulkheads, despite being short-lived. She stood and helped Rond out of his station, tossing his arm around her shoulder and leading him to the back of the bridge, where there was less damage. When the ship had begun shifting violently, he'd hit his head on his station hard enough to cause some bleeding, though he was awake.
Find Ensign Cortez, Green barked. I need medical and fire teams right now. Lock down all systems.
No sooner had the vibration stopped than the image of the sill had come up. Evie had almost let out an exclamation when she saw Cass standing on their bridge, though the appearance of them had her perplexed. From what she could tell, they didn't have any faces, though it could have just been the darkness of the bridge. Green had needed to postpone all other operations until the conversation with them was over. He couldn't afford to let anything get in the way of the mission, which meant the lieutenant had ended up bleeding all over his console while Ensign River worked to keep the ship in one place.
You're going to be fine, Isaac. Don't worry, Evie said.
He moaned in response as she helped him down to the floor with his back propped up against the wall.
All hands, we are still at full alert. I repeat, full alert, Green ordered.
Evie turned back to look at the view screen. The sill ship was still out there, holding position. It seemed they had made some progress, but it was too early to tell. All she knew was their ship hadn't been destroyed yet. Now, if only they could continue to defy the odds. The hypervator doors at the back and side of the bridge opened at almost the same time. The fire crew exited the side, running to some of the bridge conduits that ruptured when the ship nearly tore itself apart. To her surprise, Box exited the back doors, headed straight for her and Rond.
Box? Are you?
You told me to get to sickbay, Commander, he said, leaning down and focusing his attention on Rond.
And you were right. We do need as many medics as we can find. Sickbay is already filling up.
He placed his metallic fingers on Rond's head, inspecting the wound.
Good thing I have experience with head injuries.
Evie nodded, her heart bursting with pride. If nothing else, Box being here was a reward within itself for a job well done.
Looks like you finally made it to the bridge.
Officially, she smirked. He turned his head, as if only now realizing where he was. Oh, I guess I did. Okay, Lieutenant, hold still. This will hurt for only a second. He placed a small black device on the wound. Rond winced as his eyes fluttered open. You, he said, his eyes flicking back and forth between Box and Evie. Yes, me. Unless you'd rather me leave you here. There are plenty of injured people on this ship. No, I didn't expect. Many times life isn't what we expect. Box removed the device, which had stopped the bleeding. He inspected the wound again. It looks superficial. I don't think you'll need surgery. But you do have a concussion. If you'll come with me, please. He turned to Evie. He can't return to duty right now.
Understood. Thanks, Doc.
She pushed up on her knees to stand as Box helped Rond up. I'll get him down to sickbay. Has there been any word on?
He's alive, she replied. And he may have just succeeded.
Box's yellow eyes blinked 3 times. I'm very glad to hear that. He turned and led Rond back into the hypervator.
Captain, we have a ship approaching, Ensign River announced.
The sill? He asked.
No, sir. It's our missing shuttle.
Evie glanced up to see the shuttle appear as a small silver dot in the view screen, headed straight for them. Green turned to her. Grab a security contingent and get down to the bays. I don't want any surprises. Lieutenant Uma glanced up as he gave the order, which didn't escape Green's notice. I need you to stay on the weapons, Lieutenant, in case we're not in the clear yet. Diazol can handle this. She nodded.
Yes, sir.
But there was trepidation in her voice.
Do I arrest him when he comes aboard?
Evie asked. If it is him, bring him back here, Green replied. I don't want him anywhere near the brig. Evie watched as the shuttle made its way back into the bay, clipping the ceiling as it maneuvered into the space. 3 security officers stood behind her, weapons drawn. and she still had the 2 pistols tucked into her belt. But she wasn't about to brandish them unless it was necessary. She took a few deep breaths in through her nose and out through a small part in her lips. There was no telling what was in that shuttle. It could be Cass, or it could be a SIL raiding party, and Evie was willing to bet no matter how many weapons her officers had, they wouldn't be effective against them. The shuttle finally landed, hard, causing the room to shake. Evie glanced past the shuttle at Chief Master Raffenkel, who had boarded her Space Wing fighter with the cockpit still open. Raffenkel nodded in solidarity. Though she hadn't been ordered to, Evie bet the woman had her weapons lit and ready. The side door of the shuttle opened to reveal a very dirty and smelly Cass. His face was a shade of pale she hadn't seen on him before, and dark circles colored under his eyes. On his arm, he wore a portable flashlight from the shuttle's survival kit that was still on. "Hey," he said. "Miss me?"
"Are you alone?"
she asked. "Cor, I hope so." He hopped down from the shuttle. "I don't know how much more of the SIL I can take." Evie turned to the security team.
"Stand down."
She also put her hand up to Raffenkel, who returned the wave, but didn't get out of her ship.
"What happened over there?" Evie asked. "And what is going on?"
"I need to talk to the captain," he replied.
"I should have you arrested,"
Green said, taking his seat behind his desk. "If you think that's best," Cass replied, taking a seat on the other side with Evie. On the way, they'd stopped by one of the food dispensers for a protein bar. Apparently, the SIL didn't eat. Or if they did, he didn't know how. And they weren't planning on keeping him long enough to feed him in any capacity. From everything he described on their trip to the bridge, it sounded like a hellish labyrinth over there, and that was something Evie never wanted to experience.
"What is the situation?"
Green asked. Cass took a bite of the protein bar, chewed, then made a face. "We're on hold," he said, his mouth half full. He leaned over to Evie.
"I thought you said these things were good."
"Good for you," she said.
"And what does that mean? Have they agreed to help us?"
Green asked. Cass shrugged. "They weren't clear, but I think I got through to the SIL captain. She's formidable, let's put it that way. But considering I went from almost being executed to being allowed to return to you unharmed, I would take that as very good news."
"What is their goal? What do they want?"
Evie asked. She couldn't believe he'd made it back in one piece. There might be hope for this after all. "They're highly xenophobic. They won't even allow other species that reside in their own space to leave their planets. But they seem to want to preserve life. So we have that much in common. Though they have some strange relationship with their ships. I didn't quite understand all of it, but the ships are alive. And the crew forms some sort of bond with them."
"So when Rutledge captured the SIL scout ship and ejected its crew—"
"He killed the creature. The ship, whatever it is," Cass finished for her.
"How does this help us?" Green asked. "What are we supposed to do?"
"They didn't formally request anything of us," Cass replied. "But I wouldn't try to leave the area. You'll have to ask Laska, but I don't think the negotiation is over yet. I know the captain is speaking with her superiors about the situation, and they believe the footage. They know it's real."
"That's a relief,"
Evie said. Cass took another bite of the bar, chewing as he spoke. "The guard, K4, he seemed to be more on our side than the captain. I think he'll put in a good word for us. But the fact is, the SIL know if whatever is headed our way plows right through the coalition, its next target will be them. And I got the distinct impression that is a problem, as much as they don't want to admit it."
"Whatever they do, I hope they do it soon. It isn't like we have the luxury of time," Green replied. "How long did it take Rutledge to develop that weapon?"
4 years? 5? Something like that, Cass said.
"And we have less than 1.
"Presumably, with their help, it will go faster," Cass said.
"Unless they decide to take care of this problem themselves," Evie said. "What's stopping them from sending their own armada across our borders to meet them head-on? If they left now, they might make it to Valdera before running into them." But by then, they'd already be deep in Coalition territory. I think our only hope is if they give us the schematics we need to defend ourselves, and we transmit that information out to the border. Hopefully, by the time the threat arrives, Starbase 5 and its defenses will be ready.
Green turned in his chair to watch the stars out his window. Against something that can implode a star? Cass asked.
I don't know, the captain replied. I just don't know. Captain to the bridge, Lieutenant Uma's voice said over the comm.
Evie sensed the tension of the room increase tenfold as they stood and headed for the bridge. 37. Following the captain and Evie, Cass took the empty specialist position behind tactical. Page wasn't at his post. Probably a good thing, as someone would have needed to restrain Cass from strangling the man. Rond wasn't at his post either, which was strange. The captain and XO took their seats, and Green nodded to the lieutenant at tactical. The screen filled up with the image of Zenfor on her own bridge. K4 stood behind her, his long arms crossed as he leaned against the far wall.
Coalition representative,
Zenfor said. Evie turned to look at Cass, who only just realized she was talking about him. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the helm and navigation stations, so he was in the middle of the room. Zenfor?
I take it your trip back was uneventful?
Fine, thank you. Have you had a chance to confer with your superiors? This felt so strange. When he'd been young, he'd always dreamed of being the contact person for a new race, of being the first face an alien species saw when they first encountered the Coalition. But all that had been destroyed when he lost his commission. And yet, he found himself standing here anyway.
I have. The Sanctuary cannot make a decision. They are at a deadlock.
What does that mean? He asked.
It means nothing changes.
Cass tried to hide his disappointment, but he couldn't let this opportunity pass them by. Not while they had the opportunity for dialogue. Zenfor, I want to thank you for hearing me out. I know that took a leap of faith on your part, and it wasn't a leap we necessarily deserved.
It turned out to be the right decision, she said.
What will you do if the Sanctuary can't make up its mind? He stared straight at her glowing aura. It pulsed, slow and steady, reminding him of a heartbeat.
If no decision is made by the time the threat reaches us, it will be up to the individual consuls to decide how to proceed.
Does that power extend to you right now? He asked. She took a moment.
In moments of indecision, if an agreement cannot be reached, then yes, a consul may make a decision, as long as it is in the best interest of the species.
Then may I suggest you make the decision for them? Your ship has met ours, we have spoken, had dialogue, and you know the stakes. You know what we're up against. Zenfor's gaze broke, and she turned her head a moment before returning her attention to him.
Before today, we have never been interested in your kind. Your alliance is not something we wish to be a part of. For the most part, you have left us alone, which is what we want. Were it not for your Rutledge invading our property and killing our people, we might even be more inclined to help. But your actions have consequences. We must sit back and wait.
Zenfor, please. You can't wait for us to solve this problem for you. For all you know, they could pass us by entirely and just want to get to you. Allow us to help each other, to get involved. It doesn't mean this would be anything permanent, but I can think of no better reason for an alliance than that of a common foe. Maybe he was going about this the wrong way. Maybe he needed to make things more personal. You and I are very much alike. I was preparing to board a ship headed for deep space when I first found out about the threat. I was called back in to watch the footage, and afterward, they told me the plan. Go speak with you, see if you'd be willing to help. And I didn't want any part of it. I just wanted to get on that ship, fly to Procyon, and get away from everyone. Because I don't believe in the Coalition. Not like I used to when I was an officer. He turned back to glance at Evie. She was on the edge of her chair, with her eyebrows drawn together in worry. He winked at her. But then I realized, if I turned my back on the coalition, I could be potentially sentencing trillions of people to death, which would be a far worse penalty to pay than to spend time helping them. I didn't have to agree with the organization to want to help. And I also realized there was nowhere I could go where the effects of what was coming wouldn't reach me. If these aliens are as dangerous as they seem, it's going to take the combined efforts of every species in this quadrant to even slow them down. That means we can't do it without you. No one else is going to take care of this problem for you. But if you let us help, we will help. Zenfor took a step back. K4 uncrossed his arms and moved closer to the screen, standing beside her. Your words ring true, the consul said. They are true. 30 days ago, getting me to stand here in front of you seemed like an impossibility. For many reasons. But here we are. Here we are, she said. Very well. In the interest of preserving life, I am willing to help. Conditionally. What is the condition? He asked. I will not interface with anyone except you. I will not be passed around like a tool to be used. Do you understand? Cass's ears had grown hot, and he could feel the perspiration dripping down his back. I do. Return with your shuttle. It will take me some time to disengage from my ship. He didn't quite understand what that meant, but he wasn't about to question it. I will be there in less than a skirm. She nodded, and the screen clicked off. Cass took a breath, trying not to hyperventilate in front of the rest of the crew. He turned his attention back to the captain and Evie. What did you just agree to? Green asked. Cass furrowed his brow. I'm not entirely sure, but wasn't the mission to get their help? Not by them coming on board. We know little to nothing about these people. How can we expect to host them? Do they even breathe oxygen? He asked. I didn't have any trouble breathing over there, he replied. Captain? Isn't this a good thing? Evie asked. I need to confer with Coalition Central. These people are potentially a mortal enemy. By allowing them access, they could... Captain, Cass said, they can destroy us whenever they want. They don't need to steal our secrets. There is no security issue. They already downloaded everything from the first shuttle, which was a good part of our history and database. How do you think they figured out how to speak our language? Green shook his head, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's been a long few days, and You and the commander prep the shuttle. Let's take a few minutes to figure out how best to welcome them on a coalition ship. Did you ever think we'd be doing this? Evie asked as she maneuvered the shuttle close to the sill ship. I thought we were all dead the minute we crossed into their space. Cass had taken 5 minutes to shower and put on clean clothes before jumping back aboard the Calypso again. Evie took the helm and, with a precision he could never hope to match, had piloted them out of the bay and toward the sill. So, each of their ships is alive? But we can only see part of them? As far as I understand it, the rest of it is in a place they call the space beneath. Her eyes went wide. I'm not sure I like how that sounds. It's eerie, Cass said, like the absence of life. I'd rather not go back if I can help it. What are they like? She asked. Not as strange as I thought they would be once they started talking. I think we have a lot in common, though it concerns me they subjugate all the other intelligent species in their space, especially since they have the ability to cross dimensions. Leave things like that up to the diplomats, she said. Let's see if we can work out an agreement. Maybe they can help us meet this thing head on. Do you think, 100 years ago, when the first war broke out, that either side ever thought there would be peace? Cass asked, remembering what he'd learned in school about the Coalition's disastrous attempts to come to an agreement. I doubt it, but it's because none of them had sacrificed for the sill. They went in wanting something for nothing. But you put yourself on the line for them. It's hard to ignore. She peered out the window. Is this it? He nodded. It was the same small door on the side of the ship where they'd pulled him in the first time. Evie guided the shuttle inside, setting it down to the inky blackness. "They like it dark, huh?" she asked. He shuddered, thinking about walking through all those corridors with nothing to guide him, when he felt like he'd lost all tether on reality. "Too dark for my tastes." The doors on the side of the shuttle opened, revealing the dark shapes of Zenfor and one other Sill Cass hadn't seen before. He stood to greet them. "Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable coming on your own ship?" he asked. "Considering what happened last time, no," Zenfor said. "I'm not willing to risk another of our ships to you." The comment stung, but Cass understood. He turned to Evie, who had also stood. "This is Commander Diazal, second in command of the Tempest." "Welcome," Evie said. Zenfor ignored her and her own companion. "Let's get this over with," she said. Evie paused, then returned to the controls. The ship lifted as the doors closed, returning to space. Cass noticed both Zenfor and her companion hunch slightly as they exited the Sill shuttle bay, as if they were in pain. "Are you all right?" he asked. "It takes considerable effort to voluntarily disconnect ourselves from the ship," Zenfor said. "It's a painful process." "And you're sure?" "No," Zenfor said. "Just proceed. It'll subside soon." Both she and her companion reached up to the gems suspended in their auras and plucked them away, their auras going dark. Concerned, Cass moved closer, but Zenfor held out her hand for him to stay. There was a hiss and 4 clicks as both Sill reached up with their slender fingers and pulled their helmets from their heads. The helmets unlocked in the back with tiny hinges on the sides and completely unclasped from around their faces. They had faces. Their skin had a purplish-blue hue, and they had 2 eyes, small noses, and even mouths. Zenfor's face was slimmer, with a chin that ended in a point, while the other Sill, also a female, had rounder features. Both their eyes were a sharp gray, with pupils that sparkled. And from the sides of their eyes, running back along their head where they disappeared into their dark purple hairlines, were 2 identical ridges, almost like scales on top of one another, leading from the front to back. Of all the species he'd encountered, they were remarkably human-like. "This is what you really look like?" he asked. Evie turned in her seat and did a double-take at the Sill. "When we are in our ship, it regulates all our functions," Zenfor said, setting her helmet beside her. Her voice had a less ethereal quality about it. "Now, because we are no longer connected, we will need to resort to our natural biological processes." Cass's eyes narrowed. "Do you mean to tell me you evolved in another dimension, and yet you look more like my people than 90% of the species out there?" "I never said we evolved there. I said we were from there. Note the difference," Zenfor said, taking her eyes off him and staring straight ahead. He couldn't articulate what a relief it was they actually had faces. A face he could read. A blank mask he could not. "How long do you think this will take?" "Will we need to call other ships to come assist?" Cass asked. Zenfor turned her attention to him again. "Why would you need other ships? We're returning to your territory with you." 38. "Congratulations, Mr. Robeaux," Admiral Sangvi said. Cass stared at the Admiral's image on the screen in the conference room. No one else had arrived yet. "Thank you, but I can't take all the credit," he said. "Captain Green tells me you took the initiative and went off on your own to try and convince them," Sangvi said, a smile plastered on his face. "It's reminiscent of what you did back on Nullax when your fellow crewmates were in danger of burning up in the atmosphere. And it's the kind of behavior I would expect from a dedicated officer. Whether you want to admit it or not, you are a valuable member of the Coalition." Cass sighed. "Admiral, half the reason Zenfor even agreed to speak with me was because I'm not a member of the Coalition. And I would appreciate it if he would quit trying to shoehorn me into someone I no longer am." The Admiral put up his hands. but the smile stayed, loud and clear. Though I just want you to know you deserve your commission back, especially now. The offer still stands. Thank you. I appreciate it. Before everyone else arrives, give me a status update on the sill. Green tells me they won't talk without you around. They're prepared to return with us, and Zenforce seems willing to at least help for the time being. What that entails, I don't know. But Green is right. They won't interact with the others. At least not without me being close. It's like I'm, for lack of a better word, a security blanket. It's because you are the only one who has proved themselves to them. And until the other members of the crew can find a way to do that, I think you are our best hope for garnering their help. Looks like you'll be staying on board for a while longer. I expected as much, Cass said. The doors to the conference room opened to reveal Evie, Green, and Zenfor. Her Sill companion hadn't accompanied them. Everything okay? Cass asked, standing.
Their quarters are all set up,
Green replied.
We had to make some adjustments.
Cass glanced at Evie, then Zenfor, who was still in her suit, just without the helmet.
They are satisfactory, she said.
Consul Zenfor, this is Admiral Sangvi, Cass said, indicating the Admiral on the screen. Pleasure to meet a Sill. I look forward to meeting you in person, Sangvi said, his smile growing even larger.
You don't interest me. Will the one who invaded our space be at your starbase?
Zenfor asked Cass. Cass flicked his eyes to Evie, who subtly shook her head no. Yes, he's there, under heavy guard.
As another condition of my help, I want to see him, in person, she said.
I'm sure that can be arranged, Sangvi replied. But you have a long journey ahead of you. Let's start with what we would like to accomplish.
We will work to improve your defensive and offensive weapon capabilities, Zenfor said, using only your own technology. You won't have any of ours. We won't let this become a prelude to the destruction of the Sill. When this threat is over, we expect things to go back to the way they were, and for the Coalition to leave us alone. Consul? Do you think there is a possibility?
Green began.
No. On this, there can't be a compromise. Those are our terms. If you find them unacceptable, take us back to our ship.
We appreciate all the help you can provide, Sangvi said. Tempest will be our first line of defense against whatever is out there. Green's head snapped up.
Admiral? I wasn't aware.
This came down the pipeline, Cordell. As soon as you get back to 8 and reset, we're sending you out there. Tempest is the only ship we have that could possibly reach them before they hit our borders.
But we're still 30 days away from 8, which means we're at least another, 3.5 seasons from their projected position? Green said. There must be someone closer.
Let me rephrase that, Sangvi said. Tempest is the only ship that could get out there and back before they arrive. You're going to be our scout. According to our calculations on how fast they're moving, you should meet up somewhere around Omicron Terminus.
I hope you are aware weapons development takes time. It will take more than 30 of your own days to design and build anything substantial, Zenfor said.
Would you consider making the trip with them? Continuing the work as you travel? Sangvi asked. Zenfor's eyes scanned the room, and she leaned back in the chair.
I will accept, but only if I can send information about them back to my own people. We also need to prepare.
Captain? Sangvi asked.
I'm sure we can accommodate that. You can use our communications network and send back updates as we get closer. Acceptable, Zenfor said.
Very good. Then I won't keep you. Get back to 8 as soon as you can, and we'll be ready and waiting for you, Sangvi said. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Sangvi out. The screen went blank. Green turned to Zenfor.
Thank you for agreeing. I realize this might be longer than you were originally expecting. It doesn't matter. My people have 3 times the lifespan of yours. I have the time to spare. Green stood. Commander, tell the helm to set a course. Let's get back as quick as we can. Aye, sir, Evie nodded.
Though Cass noted a hint of worry behind her eyes. For some reason, she seemed more anxious. Was it because the Sill would be coming with them? Cass turned to Zenfor. If you don't mind, I need a good night's rest before we get started. And there's something else I need to do first. Are you okay? Cass asked, as they made their way down the corridor.
I'm not thrilled about going out there to meet those, things. But yeah, other than that, why?
Evie asked. You seem worried.
I'm not.
Is it the Sill? About them coming along with us?
Nope, all good.
Cass knew she wasn't telling him something. What was going on with her? He'd have to investigate later. Right now, he needed to do something he'd been putting off for much too long. The doors to sickbay slid open, revealing Zax standing at one of the terminals, while a few nurses milled about. Most of the injuries from the dampener failure had already been discharged, though Lieutenant Rond lay on a bed in the corner. Standing over him was Box, performing an examination. He turned when Cass and Evie entered the room, his eyes blinking rapidly. Holy shit, you're not dead. Box, Zax said, warning in her voice. Sorry, I'm supposed to work on my manners, Box said, coming over to them. He smacked Cass on the shoulder. Ow! What was that for? For not telling me your plan. Or including me. There was no way you could have left without needing a pilot. Oh, he needed one all right, Evie grinned. Tore the paint right off the bulkheads. And almost put crewman Zorus in a coma, Box added, which I had to fix for you. Is she okay? Cass asked. I thought I barely clipped her. Yeah, with a shuttle. Thanks to me, she's just fine, Cass sighed. I didn't want you to get into trouble because of me, and I wasn't sure how the Sill would respond to an artificial life form. Though I really could have used your navigation skills while I was over there. What? You call almost getting ripped into 1,000 parts not getting into trouble? Box asked, placing his metal hands on his hips. What? Cass asked, turning to Evie. What is this about? I was going to wait to tell you, but Lieutenant Page tried to kill him. A few different times while you were away. He's safely in the brig now. Cass clenched his fists. That motherfucker. And he nearly got me killed when he deleted all that info I took with me. No, Evie said. That was Ensign Tyler. He thought he was stopping a criminal. Cass hung his head. Of course. Is Page locked away until we get to 8? Then Coalition Central will decide what to do with him. It's nebulous, since the Accords don't specifically include artificial life forms. But Green ordered him off the ship. Lieutenant Uma took his post. And the captain offered me a personal apology, Box said, his eyes blinking twice. His pride was showing. So, as long as I don't break into the brig and strangle that asshole, Box, that inconsiderate person, I'm in good shape. Cass glanced around the room. So, this is where you are now. And this is what you want to do? It's better than ferrying your butt around, Box said. And they treat me well here. Not to mention, he's a fair medic, Zax said, approaching them. The fastest study I've ever known. Other than myself, of course. He's even managed to convince our helmsman he's not so bad. Zax glanced over at Rond, sitting up at the table. How is he? Mild concussion, no internal bleeding. He'll be fine in a few hours, Box replied. See? Zax said. He'll make a great doctor one day. She returned to her station. Cass couldn't help but grin. Not bad. Beats sitting in the room all day watching net dramas, huh? Box shrugged. You could have told me. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It wasn't that, he replied. I wanted to be sure this was what I wanted before I made it official.
I guess, now that the mission is over, you'll have to find a new pilot.
Maybe Commander Diazol would prefer to go off with you into deep space. One of his yellow eyes blinked in a wink. Cass narrowed his eyes.
What is he talking about?
Evie asked. Nothing. He's being annoying. He returned his attention to Box. No, it looks like we're both sticking around. They need me to stay to assist the Sill.
Box leaned forward. And you're okay with that?
Cass let a smile slip across his face. Yeah, I am. This has been Tempest Rising, Infinity's End, Book 2, by Eric Warren. Narrated by Larry Gorman. Copyright 2019 by Eric Warren. Production copyright 2019 by Eric Warren.